Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. The situation in Ukraine is the focus of world media attention right now. The shelling of Kharkiv has been condemned as a war crime by the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell. There's been damage across the whole of Ukraine, of course, but the next phase of the Russian operation is expected to be bloody. Ukrainian people are said to be resolute and prepared to lay down their lives, best represented perhaps by their own president, Volodymyr Zelenskiy, still in Kyiv and ready, he says, to fight, even as the Russian convoy is said to be closing in. Troops then on the capital of Ukraine. We're asking just how many ordinary people in Russia are actually in favour of this war. How many realise what is actually happening, given the propaganda fed to them by the Russian media? If they knew the truth, could Vladimir Putin continue with this operation? Some Russians have already had an insight into what's going on, denied often by the most tame and tethered media you could imagine. Across Russia, there have been protests against the military invasion of Ukraine. 2,000 at least have been arrested, still being held by police from jail. The opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has condemned the invasion and called on Russian people to take part. In the Duma, Russia's parliament, there are deputies who've spoken out against the operation too, even those who voted in recognition of the bogus independence of the Donbass in the east of Ukraine. They're now raising questions as to what is actually happening right now. I never voted for this invasion, said one of them. Let's introduce our guests to get some take on what is happening, whether Russian people do know what's happening, and if they did, would they be in favour of it? Joining us by Skype from Kyiv is Kira Rudik, who's a member of Ukraine's parliament. That's the Verkhovna Rada. She's leader of the political party Golos Zmin. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll be with you in a moment. By Skype from Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer joins us, military and defence expert and columnist for Novaya Gazeta. Thank you, sir, for being with us. The guest from Berlin coming very, very soon. We'll bring you him as soon as he arrives. But our next guest is definitely with us from Washington. Christine Berzina, Senior Fellow and Head of Geopolitics Team at the Alliance for Securing Democracy from the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm going to start with Kira, the MP of Ukraine in Kyiv, who is awaiting us there, Kira Rudik. Kira, you've been photographed. You've posted the photograph online of yourself with your arm ready to fight. Is that how you stand right now? Is that how you feel right now?
Absolutely. My position hasn't changed. It only became stronger. For the last 6 days, when we've been at war with Russia, I trained to fire the gun, and I assembled the resistance group that is helping right now our army to patrol the streets, and we are getting ready to fight Russian soldiers on our soil. We understand that there could be either a siege on Kyiv, the capital of our country, or there will be a massive attack soon, and we are getting ready. And I'm super proud that as a Ukrainian woman, I'm able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the men and hold the guns as they do, to be able to protect my family, my home, my city, and my country.
Can I ask you, Kira, do you think ordinary Russians are in favour of what's going on?
I know that the Russian propaganda is very strong. So from what I know right now, they don't even realize what's going on. However, the sanctions that were imposed on Russia will hit the ordinary Russians very soon, if it hasn't hit yet. And they will have to realize that something is happening, something is going on. But I can tell you right away that the Russian soldiers, like half of the Russian soldiers, did not realize what they're getting themselves into. They're coming with a quote unquote, we thought we will come here as liberators, that we will be given food, warm clothes, and Ukrainian women will be throwing themselves at us. This is the quote.
Kira, thank you for now very much indeed. Kira Rudik, who's a Member of Parliament in Kyiv, leader of the political party Golos Zmin. Can I bring in Christine Berzina from Washington, from the German Marshall Fund there? Christine, the situation as we know it, Kyiv basically on the point of being surrounded by this massive convoy that's closing in, people leaving as fast as they possibly can. Over 400,000, according to the UN, have left the country already. Is it possible that the news of what is really happening hasn't spread as far, well, beyond the borders into Russia?
Russia's trying very hard for that information not to go very far into Russia. Of course, it's not a black box. There are those who are able to access foreign media, to go through the social media channels, to see that something is not right. Of course, there have been protests as well in many of the major cities that are protesting the war using the term war. So there is an awareness that something is going on and that perhaps the Kremlin story is not the full story. The fact that the official channels would not necessarily tell the full truth is not a surprise in a country that still remembers its Soviet past, when information was very much whatever the leadership wanted it to be rather than any recognition of reality. Yet still, when you have the fact that there is one independent television channel and everybody else must be telling the Kremlin's truth, it is difficult for people to get the full scale. And because President Putin has represented the situation such that either Russia is a liberator or Russia is countering genocide, completely false allegations thereof in Ukraine, or that Russia is now being attacked by the West and the Russian people must stand up for the country in light of foreign aggression. This, of course, is also a very powerful message, and there are those who will be inclined to believe that. So there's a challenge right now within Russia to understand what is the truth and what is not the truth. And as you see the repercussions grow, an announcement of 20-year prison sentences for those who help the foreign side in this particular case, with that such a severe repercussion for going out into the streets and objecting and people having knocks on their doors, if it is suspected that they do not support this action, there are very stiff prices to pay for being skeptical and speaking out against the Kremlin right now.
Indeed, what is judged as helping the other side, Christine, is obviously something that perhaps in other countries you would think it was actually something trivial. But as you say, something like going out and protesting could be judged in the harshest possible way.
Absolutely, because on the one hand, yes, this is an onslaught and a fight against Ukraine, an incredibly horrible invasion of a sovereign democratic country on Russia's borders. But this is also about the Russian regime's survival. President Putin takes this personally. From the very beginning, it has never been in President Putin's interest to have a democratic, economically prosperous Ukraine on his border, because that shows his own population. If Ukraine can do it, and Ukraine is so much like us, then clearly we can have the same kind of government, the same kind of prosperity here. That is not in President Putin's interest in the least. And that in and of itself has been a threat to regime stability. So right now, when you have so much worldwide opposition to President Putin's war, naturally, the Kremlin will feel even more embattled and will take even harsher measures, even domestically, to make sure that regime stability is maintained.
Christine Bazina, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund and leader of the geopolitics team at the Alliance for Security and Democracy there. For the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in from Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, military and defense expert and columnist for Novaya Gazeta. Pavel, the floor is open to you, sir. Tell us your take on the situation. Are Russian people getting the truth?
Well, of course not. The first casualty of war is always the truth. And so there is, of course, a massive propaganda. It's not always that successful because, well, there are ways to bypass it by going into the internet. And so there is opposition to this war. It's not yet the majority at all. And, well, it's kind of a bit scattered. But on the other hand, there's no great enthusiasm for the war either. And that's also a fact. Anyways, the Kremlin is very nervous. And today, right now, as we're speaking, they began a massive suppression of what's left of the free Russian press. So as we were just speaking right now, during this program, the independent radio station Echo Moskvy was closed down, basically. They have been taken off air and their site has been closed down. And apparently the independent TV station Dost, which is also right now broadcasting in the internet, is also being taken down. So the Kremlin, yes, is afraid that there is going to be resistance to this war as the campaign drags on and becomes more bloodier. And they're clearing out all the vestiges they had to demonstrate to the world that there are opposition voices in Russia. Well, right now they're not anymore.
Will your telling of the story at the Novaya Gazeta be different from the telling of the story from, say, France 24?
Well, of course, because if I say something there, the newspaper might be closed down. So I prefer France 24, obviously. And other, of course, I mean, I give lots of interviews on it, but some of them are to Russian-speaking outlets like Dozhd or Echo, but right now they're being closed down. There's something left in the internet. But mostly it's already English-speaking kind of stations. Russia is closing in. The regime is barricading itself. It's a very nasty situation, and I'm afraid it will get worse since the war is not a resounding success at all. Actually, it's illegal right now in Russia to say publicly that it's a war. It should be called a special operation. I don't know, they believe that's better somehow.
Indeed. People are still dying, aren't they? That's the bottom line. And even today, 5 more people losing their lives in that strike on the TV tower in Kyiv. Pavel, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Pavel Felgenhauer joining us there from Moscow, columnist for the Novaya Gazeta. We have the Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik joining us from Kyiv. We've got Christine Batsina joining us from Washington from the German Marshall Fund, and another guest, Henning Hoff, now connected and with us from Berlin. I hope you can hear us, sir, and I hope we can hear you. Editor-at-large of the International Politik at German Council on Foreign Relations. We're debating, or we started with the question, do the Russian people actually know what's going on, Henning? Obviously, we have, I think, in the terms of asking that question, already decided that we think they don't. Is that fair to say, do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's clear that this is also about sort of who knows what, and it seems to me that I think we have still slight problems with the sound, I'm afraid.
Henning, stop there. Henning. We'll sort the sound out so you can be at ease and talk to us and give us your opinions. We've got another 40 minutes in the debate, so we'll get that sorted. Thank you, sir. I'll get the technical team to check everything from your end and our end, and we'll come back to you as soon as we can. Henning Hoff in Berlin, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to our guests who've already spoken. Kira Rudik in Kiev. I hope you're still with us. You told us you're ready to fight, and clearly you've heard what Pavel is saying in Moscow. Do you agree with his assessment of things? Do you think that there is this sense that basically the Kremlin is barricading itself in and is realizing it's actually sort of bitten off more than we can chew, as we say, basically fighting a losing battle now?
Well, this is what keeping us alive, the belief that this is what's happening and this is what's going on. So for the last 6 days, there has not been a major victory from Putin's side, and he has not taken any major city of Ukraine, though he tried. Oh, believe me, he tried. And he was trying to take anything to be able to show some pictures to the Russian citizens inside the country, but he was not able to. This means there were serious miscalculations on his side, and right now he is backing off with barricading and stepping up as a dictator more and more and more, with closing the media, with attacking the civilians here in Ukraine, with doing more and more steps to be imposed to more and more sanctions. He planned for a blitzkrieg. Really, like that he will come here and will take cities of Ukraine like in 1 day, maybe in 2 days. And this hasn't happened, and we don't see anything like this happening within like the next couple of days. And we are getting stronger every day. And same time, Russia is getting weaker because the sanctions are working. So actually, we only have seen 1 day of sanctions working. One, it was yesterday, the Monday. Like today, tomorrow, more and more Russian citizens will start feeling that something is going on, that their credit cards get declined, that their assets being frozen, that they, for like, I don't know, third time in the last 30 years, have lost their banking accounts, etc., etc. And Russian oligarchs and their surroundings will also start feeling that something is going on, that their children have to come back from Miami and London and live in the beautiful places such as Oriol or whatever. And this will create more and more tension inside Russia. Putin will obviously try to pressure it and put it down, but once there will be more and more these small bites, these small attacks from all over the place, it will be harder to do. So I can tell you, Ukraine and we as Ukrainians, we have only two hopes. The first one is on ourselves and our partners, on ourselves that we will fight as hard, that we will be able to push Russian troops from our soil. But the second hope is that Russia collapses and the regime collapses, and that there will be this root of evil who is pushing right now the forces onto our cities. So these are the two things that we are really hoping for, and one wouldn't probably happen without another, because we can fight very hard, but at some point our resources will exhaust. And our partners, our international partners, can also help us and support us, but at some point these resources will exhaust. That's why it's so important to move in the same directions. So the sanctions, the military support, Ukrainians' people bravery and fight, additional sanctions, closing the sky for Ukraine. All these things need to happen at the same time, so it will be a winning war for Ukraine and for democratic countries that we are right now protecting with our lives and blood.
Kira Ruddock in Kyiv, thank you very much indeed. There with no doubt your Kalashnikov handy, I imagine, because you've been online talking about that. You've just told us about how you can care for that gun, take it apart, put it back together and be ready. Let's hear now from NATO's Secretary General. He's been categoric in his condemnation of the Russian invasion. Jens Stoltenberg says both Russia and Belarus are guilty parties in the current conflict.
Putin has shattered peace in Europe. Allies condemn the unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine. The Russian assault is totally unacceptable, and it is enabled by Belarus.
Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO there. Let's go to Berlin, where Henning Hoff hopefully is now reattached, able to hear, and we are able to hear him and see him. Henning, I can see you there, sir. Great to have you back. We were talking about the situation in Kyiv. We've seen images from Kharkiv, where the destruction there has been described by Josep Borrell of the EU as on the level of war crimes. Kira was talking about blitzkrieg, a term from the Second World War with the German lightning attacks on towns. What we're seeing in Kharkiv, do you sense that that is something that one day will be prosecuted by an international court?
It pretty much looks like it. I think the blitzkrieg strategy, which Putin has sort of tried in the first week of the war, sort of clearly has failed and has not produced this kind of news that he had wanted to get out of this invasion. And I think it's been putting him in a very difficult position. And this kind of feeling that he is overreaching, that he is sort of going too far, is also endangering his own standing in Russia, as my colleagues have already pointed out. There's a real danger now to him and his regime in as far as he can sort of really sort of balance the different things he has started in this criminal way. There's a brutal war which is likely to get even more bloodier. And then there is a Russian public which is sort of already getting a little sort of suspicious what is actually going on. There's this joke making the rounds, but Pavel probably knows this much better, that sort of people are starting to ask, have you read A Special Military Operation and Peace by Leo Tolstoy? And this already sort of signals, to me at least, that the Russian public is getting more and more aware what is actually happening on the ground in Ukraine.
Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow, columnist for the Novaya Gazeta. The images that Kira was speaking about earlier about soldiers being captured, are these things that have played in Russia? Are these things that have been suppressed?
Oh, more or less suppressed, though right now the authorities agree that there were casualties, there are casualties, there are prisoners, and they're mistreated by the Ukrainians. But basically, it's a story about success. And actually, it should be understood that there are two big operations happening right now in Ukraine. One is in the south, run by this southern military district of Russia, and the other in the north, run by the western military district. Well, the one in the north is a bit faltering. The one in the south is rather successful, actually. The Russian forces and tanks broke out of Crimea, have spread out into the steppes, have taken a number of cities, not very small cities to say so, and also right now have managed to cross the Dnieper, and apparently today have entered the city of Kherson, which is a strategically important port on the Black Sea. So apparently Russia will be soon in the position to cut Ukraine away from the sea entirely, make it a landlocked country. So there, the operation is not that unsuccessful. In the north, there are problems. That's acknowledged. But apparently, they'll try to do something about that. Russia still has the initiative. Ukrainians surprised everyone by continuing into the almost already a week to have organized resistance. They still have their military staffs working, the command structure working. The Pentagon said they had only 72 hours and organized resistance would collapse and would be a guerrilla warfare. It's not. And that's, of course, very important psychologically and militarily. There's maybe even a narrow path to the future for Ukraine to kind of win this war, but it's very narrow, and Russia has many aces up its sleeve. It's not over, and it will continue.
Indeed, I don't think any of us doubt that it's over. I think we're all expecting something to happen around Kyiv very shortly. Ukraine's health ministry, Pavel, just staying with you for a second, saying this figure dates back to the weekend. 352 civilians have been killed. That includes 14 children. I mean, that's kind of something that really brings home the extent of what is happening. And I'm thinking about the images from Kharkiv. They surely have been seen on Russian media. What's the reaction been to that?
Yes, they were shown there on Russian media, and it was said that it was a Ukrainian missile that hit the main square in Kharkiv.
So that's the Russian narrative. It was a Ukrainian attack on their own city.
Yeah, that's what the Russian public is. I just saw that on Russian TV. It sounds ridiculous, but okay, that's what the Russian propaganda is running. And so hoping that the Putin's regime will just begin to kind of unravel because there are casualties and the war is running not very successful is very premature. Later, it's actually no matter what the Russian public thinks or says, without serious support and a split within the ruling class and bureaucracy, you can't budge the regime. So you have to have a combination of things. The public with discontent, which might grow as the Russian economy tanks, and it's going to tank. Our minimum lending rate, lending rate right now of the central bank is 20%. You can't run an industrial economy on 20% interest. It's going to tank. There's going to be people who lose jobs, or at least good jobs. The level of household incomes is going to decrease. The war most likely will drag on, and there'll be more casualties. And this will have a cumulative effect, not just simply someone being killed there, which is, of course, regrettable, but doesn't rock the population. A Russian attitude towards casualties is not the same as in Israel or France or America. It's a different country. But economic woes, bad war, that altogether may begin to unravel the regime, at least put some serious question marks on its survivability.
Pavel, thank you very much for that. We're hoping to get Kira Rudik back for more contributions from Kyiv. Before that, let's take a look at something that is being called for by Volodymyr Zelenskiy. This is a no-fly zone for Russian missiles, planes, helicopters, etc., to create a kind of safe space over Ukraine. Let's take a look at our report now from Emerald Maxwell here at France 24.
As Russian forces close in and shelling of Ukrainian cities intensifies, calls for a no-fly zone over the country are growing.
Evil, armed with missiles, bombs and artillery, must be stopped immediately. I believe that the complete closure of the sky for Russian missiles, planes and helicopters should be considered.
We have a right to prohibit the entrance to our airspace, and that would be one of the most effective steps for the European security.
The Ukrainian calls are being echoed by some in NATO states, such as the Estonian Prime Minister.
No-fly zone would definitely help to protect Ukraine.
And this US representative, who argued that establishing an area over which aircraft are forbidden to fly would give the heroic Ukrainians a fair fight. But no-fly zones have to be enforced, which countries do by attacking any planes that violate the ban. It means NATO allies would have to commit to shooting down Russian jets, tantamount to a declaration of war on Moscow.
A no-fly zone would require implementation. It would require deploying U.S. military to enforce, which would be a direct conflict, potentially a direct conflict, and potentially a war with Russia.
The US and its allies used no-fly zones in Iraq after the Gulf War, Bosnia during the mid-90s conflict, and in Libya in 2011. But then they were facing vastly inferior military forces, not one of the world's top nuclear powers, with a leader who has already ordered its nuclear forces on high alert. The Russian Air Force is also second in size only to the US's, and Vladimir Putin has already shown he's not afraid of escalation.
Let's go to Washington, where we have Christine Batzina of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Christine, Joe Biden, as I understand it, against this idea of a no-fly zone. What's your take on the situation?
I think that there are significant risks for NATO, for the United States, for any European country in proceeding with a no-fly zone. Right now, what there is unanimous approval for across NATO and across Europe is to support Ukraine with significant arms, with military equipment, with medical assistance, discussions potentially of taking wounded across. That is fully in play. The idea of U.S. or European NATO members coming into a direct military conflict with the Russian military is currently a no-go zone. Clearly, the NATO and the United States, Europeans do not want to wind up in a quickly escalating, potentially nuclear conflict with Russia, given that President Putin has already warned of such unthinkable consequences. Even in the discussion of fighter jets going to Ukraine, these would have had to be Russian-made MiGs transferred over to Ukraine, not with the pilots. This is about equipment. Equipment seems fine. Military support of ammunition, of guns, of anti-aircraft, anti-tank weaponry, all of that absolutely, and is being quickly mobilized. But putting NATO troops in those pieces of equipment to enforce and push back Russia seems beyond what is currently politically and for the defense of NATO from a security perspective possible. A no-fly zone sounds great. If you think of it as, oh, maybe that would be effective, but the kind of global conflict that could result in would not be as good for anybody involved. Because, of course, Ukraine also needs the continual support of the West right now. There are other options that could be possible. Is there somewhere in a border area, some kind of secure area? A different option, but certainly not what Ukraine is asking for at the moment. And the tragedy of the fact that this cannot be delivered immediately in the way that Ukraine asks is not lost on populations, whether in the United States or across Europe, because we are restricted in many ways because of the Russian nuclear threat, because of not wanting to enter an open shooting war with Russia, which we have not had. And yet we can see that 50-kilometer-long convoy of Russian military equipment coming closer and closer to Kyiv. So this is where the tools that the West is using, helping the Ukrainians with military equipment as much as possible, playing a long game with sanctions, as we just heard from Pavel, they could take effect. There could be change on the ground in Russia, but that will take time. It's not going to happen in these first days of the war. And yet, the tragedies, the imminent need for assistance in Kyiv is something that is happening right now, today, tonight, as night falls again in Kyiv, and we see so much of this taking place in the overnight hours. This is something that is so immediate, and the tools that we have, unfortunately, are much more long-term.
Christine, hear what you're saying completely. So the no-fly zone would be probably a negative thing to go for. I'm taking out of NATO and the EU as one here, and I know there are differences, but separations, but clearly in how an ordinary Russian might be told the story, it might look like the same kind of aggression, because the EU has just approved something like 450 million euros of military aid. I presume that will be redigested and regurgitated for the Russian public in a very negative manner, won't it?
The long-term narrative that President Putin has talked about with NATO or Europe was that these are aggressive institutions, that they are encroaching on Russian territory. Of course, none of this has any basis. This is, according to the Helsinki Accords, sovereign states have the opportunity to choose their alliances, their partnerships, and this is not and NATO is fundamentally a defensive organization. And of course, when you look at the enormous territory of Russia, what borders it has with NATO countries are laughingly small. So an idea of an encroachment in terms of scale is just ludicrous. And yet there is this very strong narrative that has been promoted now for 2 decades by President Putin in his current role. And that narrative has taken hold across the population. And if you have you have arms coming from the West, yes, that will, of course, be portrayed as the West stoking the war, causing the war, all of these talking points, again, regurgitated and put out by RT and other Russian media to global audiences. But you don't get into a shooting conflict between Russia and NATO or Russia and European countries individually until you have troops involved. And that is the situation that NATO and Europe is really trying to avoid while being as helpful as they possibly can be to Ukraine right now.
Christine, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Berlin. Henning Hoff waiting there. Henning, German Finance Minister Christian Lindner saying the sanctions against Putin and his circle need to be further tightened. Is that going to make the difference, do you think, this idea of actually sort of putting more grips upon the likes of Putin and his circle?
Well, I think there's already has been a lot being done in that direction, and as Finance Minister Lindner and also Chancellor Scholz sort of said today, there's more up the sleeve. I think what Christina said from Washington right now is absolutely right. There's no sort of there's a danger of sort of coming to direct contact between NATO troops and the Russians. This is something no one wants at that moment of time. But of course, sort of maximizing help for Ukraine is pretty much what is pursued here in Europe, and that probably will entail also so more sanctions. I think they are thinking at the moment about sort of increasing the pressure on the so-called oligarchs, the sort of rich businessmen who sort of underpinning the Putin regime. That so far we have seen sort of the freezing of assets, but we haven't seen the seizure of assets. There's certainly some sort of steps of escalating the situation even a little more. I think these are steps we are likely to see coming from Europe and possibly also the Americans if this war is going the way we all fear it will be.
You mentioned oligarchs. I'm thinking of the likes of Roman Abramovich, who owns the football team. That's the for any American viewers, of course, we're talking the round ball. We're talking Chelsea Football Club in London. He stepped away from it. I presume that would be Henning to protect that from being an asset that might be seized in some way, shape or form. But my question, Henning, is this. Can someone like Abramovich or someone like Alisher Usmanov have the kind of access to Putin that might make a difference? Do you feel, Henning, that someone like that might be able to sort of point out to Putin that this isn't going the way he wanted it to go, and maybe he should change his tactics or even turn back and pull out?
Well, that is one of the big questions which sort of keeps us all occupied at the moment. How far or actually how close are those people still to Putin, and whether they have any standing yet. But I think as Pavel said a moment ago, it's a combination of various factors which might work towards to ending this invasion, and one of course is putting ever more pressure on those we have for a long time have been quite lenient about. I mean, if you mentioned London. There's this it's a long time perception that the city of London has always welcomed money from Russia and from other post-Soviet countries and hasn't looked too closely where all this money is actually coming from. I think this is changing now in a very significant way, and this is again a further pressure point on the Putin regime as so far this interaction with the West was an important part of how this whole system functioned. And if you look what has happened within the last 7 days, the sanctions which have been put on Russia are really unprecedented. And we still only sense how significant they will actually be. And I think to keep the pressure up in that direction is certainly a good move. Whether it will lead to Vladimir Putin immediately changing his mind, probably not. It is I fear a long game we are playing, and it needs some determination and persistence. As Christian said from Washington, it breaks one's heart that one couldn't do more.
Henning, thank you very much indeed. I'm actually more or less out of time now, but I need 2 last comments from Moscow and from Kyiv. First, Pavel, and if you can be brief, please, Pavel, I would appreciate this. What happens next? How will it be reported in Moscow? How will Putin benefit or not?
Well, the reporting in Moscow is very wartime. So I guess they get their directives from the Kremlin, they get their emphasis, and they're pushing that thing down. But it's not, of course, like during 50, 70 years ago. There are alternative sources of information for those who want to seek them. Not all of the population wants to seek them. Many are comfortable living in the shell of Russia is right and the rest of the world is wrong, and that they're all to blame, and that will continue for some time, until the hardships of what really happened. Of course, the Russians people see what's happening with the exchange rates, because not many Russians have stocks in equities, but the dollar and the euro are very important. Everyone understands that there's going to be a terrible burst.
And at some point, they'll find it difficult to buy food, won't they? Pavel, thank you very much indeed, sir, for that view from Moscow. Let's go to Kyiv to end this debate. Kira Rudik is back with us, member of Ukraine's parliament of the party Golos Zmin, and of course armed and ready to respond, and awaiting what happens next in Kyiv. Kira, what's your final message for this debate? What's your final word from where you are?
Well, I had to interrupt the connection because there was Air Force attack right away today. And this is what Putin is doing, and this is what where we need help from all the democratic countries right now. I want to stress once again that the war that is happening right now, it's not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a more global situation where we are asking ourselves a question. If there is a force in the world right now that is able to stop Putin, and Ukraine is this force now. However, we need help, and we need help from each and every country in the world who wants us to win. And this starts with the no-fly zone over Ukraine that could be implemented anyway, with NATO implementation, with NATO without it being officially there. But this is something that is needed to be done right now before it is too late. Right now, right away, when we are talking, Russian Air Force is bombing Kharkiv, Mariupol, Melitopol, and Kyiv. And this will be something that cannot be taken away, cannot be reverted. And this is why every single day that we are waiting, there will be more and more Ukrainians who are fighting Russians. There will be more and more of them dying, more and more of us dying. We are here to protect the countries. We are here, but we need your support, and we are asking for it.
Loud and clear. Kira Rudik, MP in Ukraine in the Kyiv Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Pavel Felgenhauer from Noveta Gazeta in Moscow. Thank you to Henning Hoff in Berlin from the German Council on Foreign Relations. And thank you to Christine Betzina from the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thanks to you for watching too. Stay with us for all on Ukraine and all the world news here on France 24.